Solomon Tate was 44 years old and standing in the driveway of the house he had rebuilt with his own hands when his wife changed the locks and slid his wedding ring under the garage door in his Ziploc bag. Not thrown, slid. The deliberateness of it was the part that stayed with him because it meant she had rehearsed it. She had stood on the other side of that door, crouched down, and pushed the bag through the gap with her fingertips the way a person returns a library book they never intended to read. What Vanessa Tate did not know, and what the man standing barefoot on cold concrete at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night in November understood with absolute clarity, was that the house she had just locked him out of, the business she believed she had inherited free and clear, and every dollar attached to the Clemens family name was encumbered by a single, legally binding obligation. And Solomon was the only living person authorized to enforce it. Before we go any further, if you have ever poured years of your life into someone who eventually looked at you and saw nothing worth keeping, this story was written for you. Stay. Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of November evening where the cold arrives with no warning and no apology. 1 hour earlier the air had been mild, now it had teeth. Solomon was wearing a gray Henley shirt and work boots with no socks because he had driven straight from a job site in Mooresville, 40 minutes north, where a retaining wall on a $3 million residential project had shifted 6 inches overnight, and he had spent the last 9 hours solving it. His truck, a 2016 Chevy Silverado with 180,000 miles and a passenger seat permanently dusted with blueprint chalk, was parked at the curb. The engine was still ticking as it cooled. He had been thinking about the leftover jambalaya in the refrigerator. He had been thinking about whether Vanessa would be awake or already in bed with the door closed the way she had taken to doing recently, a behavior psychologists call emotional withdrawal, the slow, systematic dismantling of intimacy that precedes an exit the withdrawing partner has already decided on but not yet announced. He had not been thinking about the Ziploc bag. He picked it up, held it to the porch light. His ring sat at the bottom, catching the yellow glow. A plain tungsten band he had chosen 12 years ago, because tungsten does not scratch, does not bend, does not wear down. He had believed at the time that this said something meaningful about his intentions. He put the bag in his jacket pocket and sat down on the front steps. The concrete was freezing. He sat anyway. Through the front window, he could see Vanessa moving through the living room. She was on the phone, smiling. The kind of smile he had not seen directed at him in over a year. The involuntary, unguarded kind that happens when a person is talking to someone who makes them feel seen. She did not look toward the window. He sat there for 11 minutes. He counted, not because counting mattered, but because his mind needed a task that was not grief. Then he stood, walked to his truck, and drove to his mother's house in West Charlotte, where a porch light was always on and the door was never locked, and where a woman named Ruth Tate had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for exactly this phone call for the better part of a year. She opened the door before he knocked. She was 67, 5'3", wearing a housecoat and the expression of a woman who had raised a good man and spent the last 12 months watching someone try to unmake him. She looked at her son's face. She did not ask what happened. She said, "Your room is made up. There is sweet tea in the pitcher. Drink some before you try to sleep." He did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the same oak table where he had eaten breakfast every morning from age 6 to 18, and he turned the Ziploc bag over in his hands and thought about what it means when a person rehearses cruelty. Because careless cruelty is one thing, planned cruelty is architecture. It requires forethought, effort, the sustained decision to build something that will hurt, and Vanessa had built this moment carefully. The clean bag, the ring centered at the bottom, the garage door, not the front door, because the front door would have required seeing his face, and she had decided she was finished with his face. 7 years earlier, Solomon Tate had a stable contracting business, a savings account that made him feel safe in the particular way that savings accounts comfort people who grew up watching their parents choose between electricity and groceries, and a wife who kissed him on the forehead every morning before he left for job sites at 5 a.m. He also had a father-in-law who was drowning. Harold Clemens had built Clemens Development from a single rental property in 1986 into one of Charlotte's most respected mid-market real estate firms. 32 properties, 11 employees, The kind of company that sponsored little league teams and had a reputation at the local banks as a safe bet. And then the market shifted, and two anchor tenants defaulted simultaneously, and a partner Harold had trusted for 9 years turned out to have been skimming from the maintenance accounts, and within 6 months, the company that had taken 3 decades to build was 60 days from insolvency. Harold did not ask for help. Harold Clemens was a man who had grown up in Gastonia, worked tobacco fields as a teenager, and operated his entire adult life on the foundational belief that a man solves his own problems or he is not much of a man. This belief had served him well for 61 years. He was now in the process of destroying everything he had built. Vanessa came to Solomon on a Sunday evening. She had been crying. Not the performative crying that sometimes appeared during arguments, but the raw, exhausted crying of a woman watching her father lose the thing that defined him. Solomon listened. He asked 3 questions. Then he spent the next 2 weeks at the kitchen table with a legal pad, a calculator, and a cup of coffee that went cold and was reheated so many times the mug developed a permanent ring. He liquidated his savings. He cashed out his retirement fund and paid the penalty without mentioning it to anyone. He renegotiated directly with 2 banks, sitting across from loan officers in conference rooms where his work boots left faint mud prints on the carpet, and he restructured the debt in a way that kept the company alive. Within 14 months, Clemens' development was not only solvent, it was profitable. Solomon had put in $340,000 of his own money. He did not keep a receipt. He did not ask for a contract. This is what psychologists describe as selfless investment, the willingness to sacrifice personal security for the welfare of someone you love, operating on the implicit trust that the sacrifice will be honored. It is also, in certain circumstances, exactly the kind of trust that makes a person most vulnerable to betrayal. Harold Clemens shook Solomon's hand on the porch of his Dilworth bungalow on a warm evening in April and said, "I will never forget what you did, son." And he meant it. And he never did. Harold was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 14 months later. The disease moved slowly at first, then with the particular acceleration that ambushes families who have just begun to believe the worst is behind them. During his final year, Harold watched his daughter with the careful, unsentimental attention of a man who knows his time is limited and has decided to spend what remains seeing clearly rather than comfortably. What he observed cost him sleep. He noticed that Vanessa had stopped visiting the company offices entirely and had begun asking detailed questions about the trust structure and property valuations. He noticed the man, a broker named Terrence Boyd who operated out of a glass-walled office in South End and who had begun appearing in Vanessa's social media posts with the casual frequency of someone being gradually introduced to the public. Harold's accountant showed him the first irregularities in October. Small transfers from the company operating account to a personal account Vanessa had opened at a different bank. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would trigger an audit flag. Just a slow, patient bleed. Harold Clemens spent 2 nights sitting in his study with the door closed, and what happened inside that room, the internal negotiation between a father's love and a builder's legacy, is the kind of private reckoning that never fully translates into language. But the decision it produced was precise. He called Solomon to the hospital on a Tuesday morning. Vanessa was in the cafeteria. Harold's voice was thin but organized. The kind of voice that has rehearsed what it needs to say and intends to say all of it. "I restructured everything," Harold said. "Every property, every account, the entire company. It is all inside a revocable trust now. And the trust carries a matching debt obligation, dollar for dollar." Solomon was quiet. "You are the sole beneficiary," Harold continued, "and the only creditor. If the debt is ever called, every asset reverts to you. Legally, cleanly, completely. She is your daughter, sir. She is. And I love her more than I love breathing. But love is not the same as blindness, Solomon. I see what she is becoming. And I see what you are. And I will not let 40 years of my life be eaten by someone who confuses inheritance with entitlement." He gripped Solomon's hand. "Do not move until she moves. Let her show you who she is. And when she does, protect what I built, not as punishment, as preservation. Solomon held the old man's hand and said, "Yes, sir." Harold Clemens died 11 weeks later. The funeral at Friendship Missionary Baptist drew over 400 people. The mayor of Charlotte sent a letter. 3 city council members attended. Vanessa wore black and cried beautifully and accepted condolences with the practiced grace of a woman performing a version of grief that looked correct from every angle. 6 weeks after the funeral, Solomon came home from a job site and found a pair of men's shoes by the back door. Italian leather, size 11. Solomon wore a 10. He stood in the mudroom looking at those shoes for a full minute. He did not go inside. He went back to his truck, drove to the parking lot of the Harris Teeter on Providence Road, and sat there with the engine off, watching shoppers push carts through the sodium-lit evening, and he thought about the difference between suspecting something and knowing it. Suspicion is a wound you can negotiate with. Knowledge is a door that only opens one direction. He called his mother. "I need a name," he said. "A forensic attorney. The best one in Charlotte." Ruth Tate did not ask why. She gave him a name within the hour. Nadia Prescott. Nadia operated a small, precise practice from a converted Victorian on East Boulevard. She favored dark blazers, reading glasses she wore on a thin chain around her neck, and the particular economy of language that comes from 20 years of handling cases where the facts are ugly and the stakes are personal. Solomon told her everything. The trust, the debt structure, Harold's instructions, the shoes. She listened without interrupting. She made 2 notes on a yellow legal pad. She said, "How patient are you?" "Very." "Good. Because this needs to be airtight, not just legally. Emotionally. You need to let her believe she is winning until the moment she discovers she is already lost." "How long?" 14 months. Maybe 16, then 14 months. From that night forward, Solomon and Nadia conducted a parallel architecture of preparation, invisible and meticulous. A forensic audit of Clemens' development going back 36 months, legal review of every property lien, quiet acquisition through the trust of the mortgage on the house on Selwyn Avenue, the 4-bedroom colonial that Solomon had personally renovated with new hardwood floors, a rebuilt kitchen, and a screened porch that overlooked a garden Vanessa had never once planted anything in. Every document filed, every signature witnessed, every thread secured, and through it all, Solomon came home on time. He cooked on Sundays. He drove his old Silverado. He sat in the living room with project estimates on his lap and said nothing about the late nights, nothing about the new perfume, nothing about the way Vanessa had begun sleeping with the bedroom door locked. Some evening she came home at midnight, and he would be reading in the kitchen. He would look up and say, "Long day?" She would say, "Mm-hmm," and walk past him, and close the door. He would sit in the quiet and listen to the refrigerator hum and think about patience, about the distinction between enduring something and preparing for something, about how the two can look identical from the outside. Then, on that Thursday night in November, she slid his ring under the garage door, and the 14 months of preparation met the moment they had always been walking toward. What happened 12 days later, at the rooftop event Vanessa staged at the Ritz-Carlton to announce her new chapter to 200 of Charlotte's most connected people, is the part of this story that changes everything. Because Solomon did not just attend that evening, he arrived. Vanessa called it Legacy Rising. She had invitations printed on ivory linen cardstock, hired a Charlotte event firm, and reserved the Ritz-Carlton's rooftop terrace, the one with the panoramic view of the city skyline, for a Saturday evening in late November. She spent $14,000 on the event and charged every cent to the Clemens Development operating account, which she had been treating as a personal fund for over a year. 200 guests. Charlotte's established community, business owners, church leaders, old money families who had known Harold Clemens for decades, who had watched his daughter grow up at their Thanksgiving tables and in their church pews. Vanessa wore an emerald gown and a tennis bracelet she had purchased 10 days after the funeral. She stood at the entrance with Terrence Boyd at her side, no longer concealed, and greeted her guests with the expansive confidence of a woman who believed she had finally stepped into the life she deserved. And then, because locking Solomon out had not been public enough, she had her assistant call him that morning. The message: "Mrs. Tate requests your presence this evening." Divorce documents will be available for signature at 9 o'clock. Not at a lawyer's office. Not in private. At a rooftop party, in front of everyone who mattered to her. She wanted witnesses. She wanted Charlotte to see it. Solomon spent that Saturday morning at his mother's house. Ruth made cornbread, the cast-iron skillet she had been using since Solomon was in elementary school. The one with the handle wrapped in a dish towel because the original grip had worn smooth 20 years ago. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her work. Comfortable in the silence, the way only people who have loved each other for decades can be. "You ready?" Ruth asked without turning from the stove. "Yes, ma'am." She turned and looked at him. The long, reading look that takes a lifetime to develop. "You sure?" He was quiet for a moment. "I am sad, Mama, but I am ready." "Those are two different things." Ruth set down her spatula. She walked over and put both hands on his face, the way she had when he was small and trying not to cry. "Your father would be proud," she said. "Harold would be proud." Solomon covered one of her hands with his and held it there. "I know." At 7:50 that evening, a black Lincoln Continental, arranged through the trust, pulled up in front of the Ritz-Carlton. Solomon stepped out in a charcoal suit, no tie, top button open. Beside him was Nadia Prescott. Dark blazer, leather briefcase, reading glasses resting on her chain. The briefcase was approximately 4 inches thick with organized, notarized documentation. They went inside. The rooftop was full and luminous. Charlotte's skyline glittered through the glass barriers. Heat lamps cast pools of amber warmth against the November air. Solomon moved through the space the way he moved through job sites, measured pace, observant, revealing nothing. The room registered his presence. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The older guests, the ones who remembered the financial crisis 7 years ago, who knew what this man had sacrificed to save Harold's legacy, watched him cross that rooftop terrace, and something shifted behind their eyes. Vanessa saw him from across the room. Her smile flickered for one unguarded instant before she reassembled it. She crossed toward him, champagne glass in hand, Terrence a half step behind. "You actually came," she said it lightly, "for the room's benefit. I was beginning to think you would save yourself the trouble." Solomon looked at her steadily, not with anger, not with cruelty, with the particular stillness of a man who has nothing left to prove. "You invited me, Vanessa." "I did." She gestured toward a table at the center of the terrace where a manila envelope rested between floral arrangements. "The papers are right there. 5 minutes and we are done." "Before anything else," Solomon said, his voice carrying only as far as their small circle, "I want to ask you one question." The rooftop, which had been murmuring politely, grew quieter. Rooms do that when something real is approaching. "You have told everyone here that you inherited everything your father built. The company, the properties, all of it." She lifted her chin. "I did inherit it. It is mine. Do you understand what that inheritance actually is?" Vanessa laughed, the bright, practiced sound he recognized from 100 social events. "It is 32 properties in a development company worth 8 figures, Solomon. I think I understand it fine." Solomon held her gaze for one more second. Then he nodded at Nadia. Nadia Prescott did not hurry. She set the briefcase on the edge of the banquet table, opened it without theater, and began placing documents in a precise row across the white linen. She spoke without preamble. The Clemens estate, totaling approximately $47 million in combined assets, was restructured 20 months ago into a private irrevocable trust. That trust was designed with a matching debt obligation, dollar for dollar, built into its legal foundation. Every asset in the estate is secured against that debt. She paused. Mr. Solomon Tate is the sole beneficiary of that trust. He is also the primary and only creditor. He alone holds the legal authority to call the debt. The rooftop went still. Someone near the back set down their glass. Someone else drew a slow breath. The city skyline continued to glitter behind them, indifferent and bright. Vanessa's champagne glass trembled in her hand. She looked at the documents and then at Solomon. "That is not," she swallowed. "That is not possible. Page 4, Nadia said evenly, is the trust certification, filed 20 months ago, notarized by 3 independent attorneys. Page 11 is the debt assignment documentation. She moved to a second stack. This is a separate matter. She set down a bound forensic audit report with the Clemens Development letterhead. Over the past 18 months, approximately $1.9 million was transferred from Clemens Development operating accounts into 2 private accounts, one registered to Vanessa Tate, one registered to Terrence Boyd, documented through bank records, wire confirmations, and internal accounting logs. This constitutes financial fraud and misappropriation of corporate funds. The rooftop broke open, not loudly. Charlotte society does not shout, but the collective sound of 200 people responding simultaneously, the sharp intakes of breath, the rush of low voices, the quick clink of glasses being set down, was its own kind of verdict. The older guests, those who had known Harold Clemens since before Vanessa could walk, who remembered watching Solomon save the company with his own money, looked at Terrence Boyd and then at Vanessa, and their faces carried a judgment heavier than any court could deliver. Terrence had gone the color of old plaster. The practiced ease he carried everywhere had evaporated, replaced by the tight, calculating expression of a man measuring the distance to the nearest exit. "You fabricated this," Vanessa said. Her voice had thinned. Solomon's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. "Vanessa, your father loved you, but he knew you, and he planned accordingly." Then Solomon reached into the breast pocket of his charcoal suit, and what he removed was not a legal document. It was a letter, a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times, soft at the creases from having been carried close to a person for 20 months. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakable to anyone in that room who had ever received a note from Harold Clemens. Careful block letters, evenly spaced, the handwriting of a man who believed legibility was a form of respect. Written on the outside, "For the one who stayed." The older guests recognized it before Solomon said a word. A woman in the front row pressed her fingers to her lips. A man near the bar bowed his head. Solomon unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. He cleared his throat once, not from emotion, from the acoustics of an open rooftop, and began to read. "Solomon, my son, if you are reading this where others can hear it, then my daughter has made the choice I spent my last year praying she would not make. I am sorry. Sorry for you, and sorry for her, because she does not yet understand what she is losing." No one on that rooftop moved. "I built Clemens Development with my hands and my father's name and 40 years of mornings that started before the sun. I nearly lost it all. You saved it, not because you were obligated, not because any contract required it. You saved it because you are the kind of man who sees a thing falling and catches it, even when it is not his to carry." Solomon's jaw tightened. His voice held. "I could not leave my life's work to be consumed by carelessness and greed. I could not watch what I saw happening and call it love. Real love does not look away from hard truths. It faces them." He glanced up briefly, not at Vanessa, at the older men near the back of the terrace, the ones who had known Harold since long before his daughter was born. They were nodding slowly. "If she has removed you from the home you rebuilt with your own hands, let her know this. The Clemens legacy was never built for someone who confuses owning something with earning it. It was built to endure, to be held by someone with the patience and the loyalty to protect it for the next generation." He folded the letter once. "You are that person. You have always been. I am proud of you, son. Take care of what we built together. Harold Clemens." He folded it again. The rooftop held its silence for 5 full seconds. Then Vanessa broke. She had maintained her posture through the entire reading, chin elevated, champagne glass gripped in both hands, every line of her body insisting she would not let this room see her fall apart. And then the letter was folded, and her father's voice was in the air of that rooftop, present in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Something gave. She lunged forward, reaching for the letter with both hands, as though taking the paper could undo what the words had already done to the room, to the evening, to her. Her heel caught the base of a heat lamp stand. She went down, one knee, Then both. The champagne glass shattered on the stone floor in a bright spray. She caught herself on both palms, and she was on her hands and knees on the rooftop of the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the sound that came out of her was not language. It was grief. The unperformed, unguarded kind that does not know it has an audience because it is too large to care. No one rushed forward immediately, not from cruelty, but because there are moments of honest reckoning that must be witnessed to carry meaning. And every person on that rooftop understood they were inside one. Across the terrace, Terrence Boyd had been making a careful, unhurried movement toward the service elevator. He was 8 feet from the door when 2 security officers, coordinated by Nadia that afternoon because Nadia coordinated everything, stepped forward and filled the frame. "Mr. Boyd," said the taller one, "please stay where you are." Terrence stopped. He looked at Nadia. She was watching him with the unsurprised expression of someone who had built this exact contingency into the plan 14 months ago. He stayed. A hotel staff member helped Vanessa to her feet. She was past controlling herself. Her makeup streaked. Her hair loosened from the updo she had spent an hour constructing. She looked across the terrace at Solomon, searching his face, searching for triumph, for cruelty, for the satisfaction of a man who has won and wants the other person to feel every ounce of it. She did not find any of those things. What she found was harder to bear than all of them combined. Sorrow. Genuine, long-carried sorrow. The quiet grief of a man who had loved his wife faithfully for 12 years, watched her choose destruction across 18 months, and had not enjoyed a single moment of being right. "You kept all of this from me," she said. Her voice was stripped of everything rehearsed. Solomon was quiet for a moment. "No," he said gently. "I prepared for it. Those are different things." He held the folded letter briefly, then returned it to his breast pocket. "And I did not do this for revenge, Vanessa. Your father asked me to protect what he built. That is what I did." He looked at her one last time. The long, honest look of a man saying a farewell he had already privately made his peace with months ago. Then he nodded at Nadia. She was already on her phone. The legal proceedings moved with the efficiency that only happens when the documentation is comprehensive and the opposing side has nothing viable to argue. Nadia filed the civil fraud complaint Monday morning. The forensic audit had been in final form for 3 weeks. 18 months of work organized into 19 exhibit binders, each cross-referenced and notarized. The Charlotte court issued its judgment 5 weeks later. Vanessa Tate and Terrence Boyd were ordered jointly to repay the full $1.9 million plus statutory penalties, accrued interest, and legal costs within 90 days. Non-compliance would trigger criminal prosecution. There was no viable appeal. Vanessa sold the luxury SUV she had purchased the month after her father's funeral. She sold the wardrobe she had assembled on the company account. The tennis bracelet, the one she had been wearing the night of the party, was appraised and sold to an estate jeweler on South Boulevard. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Pineville. Clean building, reasonable rent. The kind of place she would have described 18 months ago as beneath her. Terrence Boyd's brokerage license was suspended pending a state regulatory review. 4 former clients, apparently emboldened by the publicity of the case, filed complaints that had been sitting in drawers for years. He closed his office in February. The divorce was finalized quietly. Solomon signed the papers on a Wednesday afternoon in Nadia's conference room. Plain black pen, the same kind he used for construction contracts. He signed, set the pen down, and looked at Nadia. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "You did the work," she said. "I filed it." "Still." She held his gaze. For Nadia Prescott, what followed, a faint softening at the corners of her expression, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. 3 weeks after the judgment, Vanessa's attorney paused during a procedural call and said, carefully, "My client has a personal question. Off the record. Who is Camille Hendricks?" She had seen a photograph. Someone who attended the party had posted it, not maliciously, simply the way people share significant moments. A candid shot taken outside the Ritz-Carlton that evening, Solomon standing near the car, calm, checking his phone. And there, visible through the rear window, a woman sitting in the back seat reading a paperback. Short, natural hair, the kind of composed, unhurried presence that comes through even in the background of a photograph. Camille Hendricks, 41 years old, pediatric nurse practitioner at Atrium Health in Charlotte. She had a direct manner, an easy laugh she did not use carelessly, and the particular steadiness of a person who has spent years in rooms where calm is not optional and honesty is not negotiable. She had first met Solomon 5 years earlier during a Habitat for Humanity build in the Greer Heights neighborhood. Clemens Development had donated materials. Solomon had shown up personally to frame walls because that was how he operated. Camille had been volunteering that same weekend. She brought the crew lemonade on Saturday afternoon. They talked briefly about load-bearing walls and about the specific resilience of children who grow up watching their parents build things. She had walked away thinking, with quiet certainty, that is a very good man. She held that thought for 5 years. Not urgently, not uselessly. The way a careful person keeps something worth keeping. 10 months ago, Solomon had called her. It was a Thursday evening. She was finishing charts at the nurse's station. He said, "I do not know if you remember me." She said, "I remember you." They had been together since, steadily, honestly, without performance. Two people who understood their own minds, sharing dinners and slow Saturday mornings, and the kind of conversation that reveals exactly what you have been missing without ever saying it directly. They were engaged. The wedding was planned for April. Solomon responded to Vanessa's question in writing through Nadia's office. "Camille Hendricks is my fiancée. We are to be married in April." No additional context. None was needed. Vanessa read the response in her Pineville apartment, sitting on a rented couch, because most of her furniture had been sold. She read it twice. Then she set the paper on the kitchen counter and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the parking lot below. She thought about something her father had told her once when she was a teenager and had mocked a quiet boy at school for wearing the same shoes every day. "Baby," Harold had said, "the ones who never make noise are the ones you need to pay the most attention to." She had not paid attention. The morning light in Charlotte arrives with particular patience in late autumn, touching the rooftops of the Plaza Midwood bungalows one by one, before sliding down into the streets. Solomon was on the back porch of the Selwyn Avenue house at 6:22 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee Camille had made in the French press she had installed on the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago, with the quiet authority of a woman who intends to stay. In his other hand, he held his father's old Timex watch, a simple analog face, stainless steel band, nothing expensive. He turned it over once, the way he always did, wound it slowly. The small, precise tick it made, a mechanism keeping perfect time regardless of everything happening around it, was one of the most grounding sounds he knew. He looked out at the yard, the garden beds Vanessa had never planted, the fence he had rebuilt last spring, the oak tree in the corner whose roots he had worked around when he laid the patio stones. Because some things that have been growing quietly for a long time deserve to be left where they are. He thought about his father. He thought about his father. He thought about Harold. He thought about what it costs a man to pour himself into the people and things he loves, quietly, consistently, without recognition, and how it is enough anyway, how it has always been enough. He said it softly, to the garden and the oak tree in the morning. "I did it, Dad." The back door opened behind him. He heard her before he saw her. The soft sound of bare feet on the porch boards. The slight catch of breath in the cool morning air. Then Camille slipped her arms around him from behind, her chin on his shoulder, her warmth against his back, holding on with the easy certainty of someone who has nowhere else to be and no interest in being anywhere else. They stood like that for a moment, watching the yard fill with light. This was one of the things Solomon had come to treasure about her. The understanding that silence between two people can be its own form of closeness. Camille had spent her career in rooms with frightened families and sick children, and she had long since learned that presence matters more than words. Then she said, her voice warm with a trace of amusement, "The guest bedroom still does not have curtains." "I know." And the kitchen faucet has been dripping since Monday. I know that too. And your mother has called me 3 times this week about the wedding flowers. She has mentioned gardenias in every single conversation. I need to know where we stand on the gardenias, Solomon. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that rises from below the ribs. The kind that had been scarce for 18 months and was now, quietly and unmistakably, returning. Tell her she can have all the gardenias she wants. Camille reached past him and handed him a second cup of coffee. She had brought 2. She always brought 2 because she paid attention to the small things and always had. Are you all right? She asked, not with worry, with the honest, direct care of someone who wanted a true answer. He considered it. Fully and without hurry. Yes, he said. I genuinely am. And he was. Not the performance of being all right. Not the composed exterior of a man enduring. Actual peace. The settled stillness of a person who has carried a heavy thing for a long time, set it down carefully, and walked away without looking back. Ruth Tate arrived at 11, the way she always did on Sundays. Carrying a covered dish, her sweet potato pie with the brown sugar crust, the one Solomon had been requesting since he was 7 years old. Wearing her good church dress and the expression of a woman who had been correct about everything and was far too gracious to mention it, she set the dish on the counter, looked around the house. The one her son now owned free and clear. The one his wife had locked him out of on a cold Thursday night in November. She was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to where Solomon was standing, took his face in both hands, and held it there. I am proud of you, she said. You already told me that, Mama. I will keep telling you until it reaches all the way inside, she said. She released him and looked past him at Camille. Now, the guest bedroom has no curtains. That is not acceptable. We are handling that this afternoon. Camille laughed from across the kitchen. A warm, unguarded sound that filled the room easily. Ruth winked at her. The gardenia negotiations resumed within minutes. Later that afternoon, while Ruth and Camille worked through centerpiece logistics with the cheerful intensity of 2 women who have discovered they genuinely enjoy each other, Solomon stood once more at the porch railing, watch in hand, yard below. He let himself think of Vanessa, not with bitterness, not with triumph, with the honest, quiet grief of a man who loved someone for a long time and watched that person choose poorly, over and over, until there was nothing left to choose. He did not hate her. He did not wish her harm. He simply accepted, with the full weight of a man who had nothing left to prove, what was true. She had held something rare and real and let it go because she mistook his quietness for weakness and his patience for lack of ambition. She had looked at a man building something permanent in the background of her life and seen only a man standing still. He wound the Timex one last time, tucked it into his pocket, and went inside to join his family. This story leaves us with 3 things worth remembering. Not on a phone you will lose in a year, but somewhere permanent. First, before you sign anything tied to money, an inheritance, a trust document, a property deed, read every page yourself. Vanessa inherited $47 million and never once examined what was actually inside the paperwork. At any age, but especially when family wealth is involved, sit down with a cup of coffee and an independent attorney you chose yourself, not the family lawyer, yours. Second, the people in your life who show up without being asked, who fix the porch rail on a Saturday without mentioning it, who call on a Tuesday for no reason. Those are the ones who deserve a handwritten note this week, not a text, a note, dropped in the actual mail. Solomon spent 12 years being that person, and it was never once acknowledged until it was too late. Do not let that be your story with someone you love. Third, greed is almost always quiet at first. It borrows small. It explains itself reasonably. By the time it is loud, it has already done most of the damage. Trust what you notice early. Harold Clemens noticed. He just waited too long to act. Do not wait. This story was crafted with the simple hope that kindness still matters, and that no matter how many trials life delivers, there are always moments of justice and quiet miracles waiting for those who deserve them.